What if, at the moment of your death, your soul didn't meet an angel or a demon, but a jackal-headed god, standing in the shadows, waiting to place your heart on a golden scale? For the ancient Egyptians, this wasn't a myth, it was destiny. His name was Anubis, the god of death, the silent guardian of tombs, and the one figure every soul had to face before entering eternity. But his story isn't just about death, it's about power, betrayal, and a surprising fall from glory that reshaped the very idea of the afterlife. Most people today know Osiris as the ruler of the underworld. But long before Osiris took the throne, Anubis was the original master of death. And how he rose, and later fell, is one of the most mysterious and forgotten chapters of Egyptian mythology. Why Egyptians obsessed over death? To understand Anubis, we first need to understand why the Egyptians were so obsessed with death in the first place. For them, death wasn't the end, it was a gateway. Life on earth was just a short journey compared to the eternity that came after. They believed in a paradise called the Field of Reeds, a perfect reflection of Egypt itself, but without pain, hunger, or sorrow. Imagine endless fields of crops ready for harvest, the Niles. Waters always calm, families reunited under the shade of eternal trees. It was everything they loved about life, magnified into perfection. But reaching this paradise wasn't guaranteed. A body had to be preserved, the soul had to survive, and, most importantly, it had to pass judgment. That judgment came not from a human king, but from a god who watched over the threshold of eternity, Anubis, the judge of souls. Every soul, whether a farmer or a pharaoh, had to stand before Anubis in what the Egyptians called the Hall of Truth. This was no simple trial. Anubis would place the heart of the deceased on a golden scale, balancing it against a single white feather, the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and justice. If the heart was heavy with lies, cruelty, or corruption, the scales tipped, and the punishment was worse than fire or torment. The heart was thrown to a monstrous devourer, called Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. Once Amit consumed it, the soul was erased forever. No afterlife, no second chance, just nothing. But if the heart was lighter than the feather, Anubis would declare the soul pure. Only then could it step into the eternal paradise of the Field of Reeds. Unlike death gods in other cultures, Anubis wasn't cruel or vengeful. He wasn't punishing the wicked, he was protecting eternity itself, making sure only the just could enter. But how did this jackal-headed god rise to such power in the first place? Origins of the Jackal God. Long before temples and golden sarcophagi, Egyptians noticed something unsettling. Jackals roamed the desert, digging up shallow graves, scattering bones, and tearing at them. Remains of the dead. To people who believed that the body was the soul's anchor, this was horrifying, because if a body was destroyed, the soul was lost forever. Instead of fighting nature, the Egyptians transformed their fear into faith. They elevated the jackal into a divine protector, creating a god who could guard the tombs from the very scavengers that haunted them. That god was Anubis. From that moment on, images of black jackals appeared carved into tomb walls, painted on coffins, and placed at burial sites as warnings to grave robbers, both animal and human. Anubis became the guardian of cemeteries, the watcher at the gates of eternity, and, eventually, the god entrusted with judging every soul. But his story didn't end there. In fact, it was about to collide with one of Egypt's most dramatic and tragic myths, the story of Osiris. Anubis and Osiris, the power shift. According to legend, Anubis's greatest act wasn't judging the dead, it was inventing the art of preserving them. The story begins with Osiris, a beloved god-king, betrayed by his own brother Seth, the lord of chaos. In a jealous rage, Seth tricked Osiris, killed him, and tore his body into pieces before casting them into the Nile. Osiris's wife, Isis, gathered the fragments of her husband, desperate to bring him back. But she couldn't restore him alone. She turned to Anubis, the jackal god who knew the secrets of death itself. Anubis carefully wrapped Osiris's body, anointing it with sacred oils, binding it with linen, and performing the first mummification ritual in history. Through his skill, Osiris was reborn in the world of the living, but as ruler of the dead. From that moment, the throne of the underworld passed to Osiris. Anubis, once the supreme judge of souls, stepped aside. He was no longer king, but he became something just as important: the eternal guide. The one who escorted the dead to judgment stood beside Osiris and ensured every soul faced the scales. And despite losing his crown, Anubis's presence only grew stronger in rituals, ceremonies, and tombs. But what made him so enduring, even after being overshadowed by Osiris? Symbolism and worship. Even after Osiris took the throne of the underworld, Anubis remained a constant presence. Tomb walls showed him as a black jackal crouched protectively over coffins and statues, carved in dark stone-guarded burial chambers, linking him to both decay and rebirth. Priests performing funerary rites often wore masks of Anubis, believing they were channeling the god himself. To the Egyptians, he wasn't distant or abstract. He was physically present, at every burial, guiding and protecting the soul on its journey. His influence even crossed borders. Greek and Roman writers described him, sometimes merging him with their own deities. And while Osiris ruled in myth, many scholars believe ordinary Egyptians felt closer to Anubis, the god who touched every life in death. Anubis versus other death gods. Most cultures imagine death as terrifying, ruled by gods who punished and tormented. In Greek myth, Hades reigned over a shadowy underworld filled with monsters. In Christian tradition, the devil ruled a fiery pit where the wicked were condemned forever. Even the Aztecs spoke of Mictlantecutli, a skeletal god who delighted in the suffering of souls. Anubis stood apart. He didn't torture or condemn. He weighed, judged, and guided. To the Egyptians, death wasn't supposed to be endless punishment. It was a passage that demanded fairness. The jackal god's role was to make sure that justice, not cruelty, decided the soul's fate. That difference is why Anubis fascinated not only the Egyptians but later civilizations who encountered his myth. Where others saw horror, the Egyptians saw a protector. And that may explain why, even after losing his throne to Osiris, Anubis never lost his power in the minds of the people. From a scavenger feared for desecrating graves to a divine guardian protecting every tomb, Anubis's journey is one of the most dramatic transformations in mythology. He was once the supreme ruler of the dead, later overshadowed by Osiris, yet he never vanished. Instead, it became the eternal guide, escorting souls to judgment, guarding cemeteries, and ensuring the balance of truth was never broken. His story reminds us that the Egyptians didn't see death as punishment, but as a test of fairness. Anubis wasn't a god of terror, he was a god of justice, standing watch over every heart that dared to face the scales. So maybe the real mystery isn't why the Egyptians worshipped a jackal-headed god, but why they trusted him more than kings or pharaohs. Because in their eyes, eternity itself depended on him. And perhaps that's why, thousands of years later, the shadow of Anubis still lingers, guarding the forgotten chapters of death.